We're continuing our look at the challenges facing Sheffield and how the city has dealt with them. Today we're going to be looking at greenfield and brownfield sites, urban sprawl and commuter settlements. Before we go any further, pause the recording here and see if you can come up with a definition for these terms. Have a large piece of paper or perhaps a double page in your exercise book in front of you as we go through the rest of this presentation. Create a mind map to help you remember some of the key points. Greenfield sites are exactly what they sound like, green fields. They're often open fields or woodland that have never been built on before. That means that they are sometimes in the countryside or on what we call the rural urban fringe, which is the edge of the city. Brownfield sites, on the other hand, have been built on before and have been cleared ready for development. They present all sorts of problems as they're in the heart of the city. Here's an example of a brownfield site in Sheffield that you might be aware of. You can see Tesco's on Abbeydale Road and Sainsbury's on Archer Road here. And it's not the area in the red shape, it's this area here, which has now been turned into a series of flats. And you can see from this picture that this was a workshop or perhaps warehouses that were derelict, and these were cleared to make way for the flats. And perhaps our most famous brownfield site redevelopment is this one. It's Meadowhall in the lower Don Valley. Sheffield is trying to develop more of its brownfield sites to reduce the need to develop greenfield sites on the edge of the city, particularly in those Peak District areas. But those brownfield sites have advantages and disadvantages. Some of the advantages are here. You're more likely to get planning permission for a piece of land that's already been built on, especially if it was derelict. The authorities are likely to see that any new development is better than a derelict building. Certain aspects of the project are likely to be cheaper because you've already got roads running close to the site. You will have gas, water, sewerage, etc. and drainage already in place. Particularly in Sheffield, we're keen to stop the expansion to the west because we don't want to lose the Peak District. And also the fact that the site is likely to be closer to the CBD means that the people who are going to live or work there will have access to all the shops and recreational opportunities there. But the first thing you've got to do with a brownfield site is clear it, and that can be expensive, particularly if it is a polluted or contaminated industrial site. Next of all, those sites tend to be quite hemmed in by the road patterns that are already there and the buildings around them, and so you won't have room for large gardens, for example. You may not have a huge amount of choice of what you can build. The land use might be restricted to certain types of building. And of course, land closer to the CBD is more expensive. As we build on more greenfield sites, we expand our cities out into the countryside. Urban sprawl is that expansion. It's the growth of the cities out into areas that weren't previously built on. Sheffield is surrounded by greenbelt land. If you have a look at the map here, Sheffield isn't marked on, but it's just under the H of the word Manchester. So it's very difficult for the city to expand. This greenbelt land has special restrictions on the amount of building that can happen there. The rural urban fringe is that area of land on the edge of the city just where it meets the countryside. Rural urban fringe is in demand because the land is relatively cheap. It's also quite open, which means that you've got a large amount of space that you can put in things like large car parks. And so we often get things like business parks and science parks, retail parks, out-of-town shopping centres, etc., being built on this rural urban fringe. That in turn attracts housing developments. So here's a summary of some of the benefits. You can see the cheap land, the room for expansion, the attractive environment, good accessibility, available workers from the city, and plenty of car parking space. One of the main reasons for urban sprawl is the need for more houses. The population of the UK is demanding more and more houses, and that's not particularly because the population is growing, although it is slightly. And as you probably know from our previous lessons, Sheffield is one of the fastest growing cities in the country. But it's more than that. As life expectancy increases, people are holding on to their houses for longer and longer. And that means we've got more pensioners living in houses and not releasing them back into the housing market. We have more people living as single households. People are getting married later and divorce has increased. And so we have twice as many houses needed for a divorced couple, for example, than a married couple. We have immigration to our city and to our country, which also adds to the demand for houses. And we have more adults at the moment. So this urban sprawl is the spreading out of cities into the countryside. Most building projects get some sort of complaint, particularly if you're building in the countryside. People want to keep that countryside for them to use for other purposes, such as recreation. People who complain about something, even though they know it might be needed, are called NIMBYs, which stands for Not in My Backyard. They might, for example, recognise the need for a new prison, but not want it to be built anywhere near to them. So NIMBYs can be the people who object to the planning applications. We're going to look at one example of how Sheffield has expanded, an area called Waterthorpe, which is out near Crystal Peak Shopping Centre. If we have a look what's there, you can see that you're close to open countryside with Rother Valley Country Park. You've got large areas of green space, and then areas of the city, such as Hackenthorpe, and of course, Waterthorpe itself. And here it is to the southeast of this particular map. You might already know places like Mosborough and Althorpe. You can see that it's an 18-minute journey to Sheffield city centre by car, and it's actually quicker by other methods of transport. People are wanting to live outside of Sheffield, or at least on the edge of Sheffield, because of some of the problems of being closer to the centre. There's increased congestion in city centres with real difficulties of parking, particularly in old areas of houses that were built before the invention of the cars or before most people had them. Here you get a lot of people having to park on the roads, blocking the roads and making it difficult for other people to travel down them or to park outside their own houses. You've also got the difficulty of driving into the city centre. It's very, very slow, and when you get there, it's hard to park. Houses in the city are becoming more expensive too. There's an increased number of houses in the CBD and flats, and those are quite pricey because they're in high demand by people who want to live close to all the amenities of the city centre. But it's not just that. The lack of good housing in the city compared to the number of people demanding it has meant that the house prices have risen massively. Of course, there's poor air quality, there's also noise and light pollution, and so many people want to move out of the city centre and towards the edges or perhaps into the countryside. We call some of these negative factors push factors. You might want to create a mind map or some sort of fact file about Waterthorpe so that you can remember some of the key details. Back in the 1960s, an area of coal mines and fields was designated as a place for a new part of the city to expand. A shopping centre was created with schools and community facilities. And in the 1970s, the local government put social housing on the area. Throughout the 80s, the area expanded with the Crystal Peaks Shopping Centre being opened. This attracted lots of other people, and now there's a lot of private housing, semi-detached and detached housing in the area too. So you have a wide variety of different sizes and costs of housing. And the area was planned carefully so that traffic wouldn't be too much of a problem, with no through roads and cul-de-sacs, and the houses have driveways to reduce on-street parking. So it's a safe and clean place to live. So here's just a few images of the area. You can see the Crystal Peak shopping centre, which draws people in, and other retail opportunities too. So people like to live in Waterthorpe rather than Sheffield. It doesn't suit everybody, but there's one big advantage. The houses are cheaper than the average for the city. The houses, as you can see from the prices on this slide, are £70,000 cheaper or so, which is a huge amount of money to save. And because you've got a lot of open space, you can get large houses with large gardens. The shopping centre, which offers free parking, unlike the city centre, allows you to shop in all weathers because it's undercover, again, unlike the city centre. And it's right on the tram stop and a bus station, so it's really easily accessible. 11 million people visit the shopping centre at Crystal Peaks each year. And here are those transport facilities. So accessibility to other parts of the city is quite easy. So although you may live here, you probably want to work in the city centre because that's where the majority of jobs are. It's only 13 minutes by tram to get there. And so that's not much of a commute, and it means that you don't need to take a car and pay for expensive car parking. One of the reasons why places on the edge of the city have expanded, though, is to do with cars. More families have more than one car, and so accessibility to other parts of the city is a lot easier, so living on the edge isn't such a problem. There are, of course, some negative impacts of all of this. In the area where the shopping centre and houses are being built, of course, you get more cars and therefore more congestion. So one of the advantages the site originally had has gone to a certain extent. As the place becomes more and more popular, those cheaper houses become more demanded and the prices go up. And so again, you can lose that advantage. Conflict with local people also is a bit of a problem whenever you expand an area. People are beginning to get fed up with the new people moving in and the amount of cars that are there. So here are a couple of examples of the kind of question you might get on this topic. Suggest 2 reasons why commuter settlements are becoming popular places to live. Use an example. And what are the negative impacts of commuter settlements? Use an example. Both of these questions would require you to put in 2 points probably, and to develop each of those points.